Hey everyone, I'm rather incoherent, and this is the Jenny Barnes deck that I played and returned to Path to Carcosa. Looking at it, something stands out immediately. To say that this deck has gotten a lot of experience would be a gross euphemism. This deck has an obscene amount of experience. About 2/3 of that comes from the Path to Carcosa, Delve Too Deep, and Sharon's Obel. But 38 of it came from her alternate signature card, the Greenman Medallion. I've already posted a video about how toxic the Greenman Medallion is, and the way it works isn't particularly complicated. It asks you to spend a huge amount of money on it in exchange for a huge amount of experience discounted from the next card that you buy in the next upgrade phase. I'm not going to dwell too much on it. If you want to see how easy it is to maximize this thing, you can watch the campaign. But I got 38 experience over the course of the campaign from this card. I bought double for 1 experience after Scenario 1 and got the Black Van for free after Scenario 2, and any other character would have just had to spend like all 14 of the experience in those scenarios on those 2 cards. But I got to spend that upgrading the events that make the deck work properly. In addition to. I'm not going to dwell on the Greenman Medallion too much, but I have to mention it because it's obvious that something is wrong, and that something is the Greenman Medallion. When you talk about Jenny Barnes, you have to specify which version of Jenny Barnes are you talking about. Are you talking about the one with the signature asset guns that literally do nothing? Where even if you're playing Fighter Jenny for some reason, they're not the best gun you could be using? Or are you talking about the one where they have a meta-scaling asset where you sort of hemorrhage money during the late game and sort of screw yourself over, really? But in exchange, you just get to build 2 decks. I got more experience from Greenman Medallion than I got from my first playthrough of Dunwich. I'm not going to be talking about this version of the deck when I talk about it, because I find that the Gold Pocket Watch and Ace in the Hole sort of misrepresent how the deck normally looked, because I cut Faustian bargains for them. This is a much more accurate representation of how the deck was meant to be played through most of the campaign when I needed the economy from the Faustian bargains to help pay for the Greenman Medallion. So let's talk about this deck. And first and foremost, Jenny Barnes is at her best playing as a big money hoarder archetype. The big money hoarder archetype has already been pushed incredibly hard by recent expansions, to the point where I think it's pretty close to the best way to play every single green character. Jenny Barnes, since she just naturally generates more money, is inherently tilted towards playing that archetype. 3s across the board makes her stat line harder to work with, but the Black Fan plus Gios actually gets her to base 5s across the board, and suddenly we're talking about someone who looks less like Lola Hayes and more like a fully online Calvin. Let's start by talking about the events. I have 3 types of events. I have the payoff events, Intel Report, Money Talks, and Counter-Espionage. Intel Report for Testa's Clues, Money Talks, and Counter-Espionage to protect the team from the Mythos deck. I have draw events, Deep Knowledge, and Black Market. These are probably the most important cards in the deck. I just need these to make sure I draw enough cards to get going, to generate the money, to find double-double. All of that needs to be happening, and that makes Black Market and Deep Knowledge insanely important. But honestly, almost every card in the deck is insanely important in its own right. The other events are all economy events. We have Easy Marks, Emergency Caches, Faustian Bargains, and Hot Streaks. And 5 of these events, Easy Marks and Emergency Caches, draw a card as well as gaining the money. So the plan's pretty straightforward. Dig through your deck with all of your draw cards, find double-double, and then start duplicating economy cards so that you can duplicate intel reports. Use Well-Connected, as well as Counter-Espionage and Money Talks to make sure the Mythos deck never hurts you or anyone else. And you might look at this, see all my 1-of assets, and say, hey, why didn't you just use Underworld Contacts? And the answer is because the deck is objectively worse with Underworld Contacts. You might think that removing 5 cards will make me more consistently find my 1-of assets. But that's only true in an incredibly short-sighted sense. You see, if I were to cut all of my duplicates over here, I'd be cutting a Black Market, which essentially draws 5, a Deep Knowledge, which draws 3, 2 Easy Marks that draw 1 each, and an Emergency Cache that draws 1. I'd also be cutting some more cards, but I've already listed 5 cards that either replace themselves or draw even more cards. As long as you're willing to spend the actions playing Easy Mark and Emergency Cache, which I obviously am, I'm a big money deck, I want to do that, then the deck is actually becoming less consistent by running Underworld Contacts, because I'd be cutting more draw than I would be removing cards. I've talked about our events enough. Let's talk about the actual assets in the deck. I'm running Switchblade because of a belief I have about the game. Previously, I thought this Clover's job was to find clues as quickly as possible, the faster the better, no upper limit. I've since changed my thought process. I don't think the other one's wrong, but it's not how I feel anymore. I now think that the Clover's job, once they're to the point where they are getting 100% of the victory experience on the map, and like easily beating the Doom Clock by several turns, getting more clues might minimize your exposure to encounter cards, but I think you're more likely to die to getting really unlucky with a pile of monsters all happening at the same time, so I really want my Clovers to be able to participate in combat. That's why Switchblade is here. You might look at Switchblade on Jenny and think that I've lost my mind, but let's look at everything else and then come back to Switchblade. I've already mentioned that Black Van's giving me +1 to everything in additional action, and he also giving me another +1, but I run Leo as well, so I've got 5 actions and 5 in all my stats, but it's actually going to get even grosser than that. Because I've got Lola, I actually have 6 in my book, and a 5-action, 6-book Clover is pretty strong. It can't break the toughest job locations in the game, but again, we have Intel Report for that. But we have more than 5 actions. We have Haste. Between investigating, moving, or even just drawing twice and using Haste for a 3rd draw, there's always something to use Haste on. But 6 actions isn't enough. 6 investigate actions in a 6-book investigator would be pretty good, but this deck actually gets 8. The Red Clock level 5 is a card that's a bit too expensive for what it does in most decks. It's not bad, but you usually have something else you could justify doing more. The way the Red Clock is supposed to work is that it's going to cycle through all these effects. First turn you get +4, next turn you move 3 times, next turn you take 2 actions, and then you're going to get 3 resources and go back to 1 charge and get +4, and you're going to loop through them over and over again. The Eldritch Sophist, however, can stop the clock. He can take the charges off of it, put them somewhere else. And now you're just able to take 2 free actions every turn and have 8 action turns in this deck. Where the charges go almost don't matter. Eldritch Sophist is just a price to pay for this. But it's important to note they have to go somewhere that can take charges. You can't just put them on a random object. Originally, I wanted to run a Mystic asset that got clues, and that seemed like a great use for charges. It doesn't cost 6 experience, unlike a Decorated Skull and a Relic Hunter, so that's a good start. But the problem is, I never really felt like I needed the clue finding power, and when I was setting up, I never felt like I had the money to just throw down a 4 or 5 cost asset. The reason I ended up choosing Decorated Skull is because of all the charge assets you can pick. This is the only one that costs nothing to put into play, and can actually help you if you put it into play by allowing you to spend the 3 charges to draw cards and gain resources. The only way Lily ever feels weak once she's online with her endgame experience like this is if you draw like a very specific combination of payoff cards and you don't have any resources or any draw in your hands. And Decorated Skull helps you avoid that scenario, which is why I'm choosing to use it. But honestly, you could use anything here. You have 6 book and 8 actions, you'll be fucking insane. And that's really a good summary of this deck and why I'm going to stop talking about it. It spent 84 experience. Of course it's broken. Like, yes, I have 8 actions and 6 book. Look at all the experience I've used, that sort of checks out. But despite just explicitly saying this shitty deck is broken, I would never put her in my S tier. And it's not just because I think the Greenman Medallion is unfun. I'm ranking them by how powerful they are, not how much I enjoy playing them. No, the reason you would never go on S tier is because you can't judge a character by how it looks in the last scenarios of a campaign. You have to judge it by how it performs in Scenario 1 as well. And the fact is that the Greenman Medallion is actively detrimental in Scenario 1. It has given you nothing and it's asking quite a lot from you. And in fact, for the first couple scenarios, your deck just isn't good enough to make up for the fact that you're playing Jenny Barnes and her stat line is terrible and her ability doesn't really do anything. This Scenario 1 deck isn't very good. Like, I'm sure I've done something wrong. There must be something somewhere I can improve. There's got to be a better card than Cunning, for Christ's sake. But I couldn't find it. And if I weren't in Carcosa and couldn't justify running Fine Clothes, I don't know what I'd do with this slot. I've got no idea. I'm not going to call this deck terrible. It's a functional Clover. Maybe only barely, but it is. But at the start of a campaign, Jenny is so weak in Scenario 1. In Scenario 2, she gets a lot better. Being able to buy a lot of cards for very little experience because of Easy Mark, and just replace so many of these bad cards in one upgrade, is incredibly helpful to the deck. To the point I was actually considering taking, in the thick of it, taking 2 trauma, either split evenly or both in health, and just getting Easy Marks initially because I thought it would improve the deck so much. that might even be correct. The more I say it, the more I think I should have done that. But even in scenario 2, when she is so much better than she was in scenario 1, she still isn't crazy in scenario 2. It's not until scenario 3 or 4 that she really starts to become actually broken. And because she struggles so much in these first 2 scenarios, I think she's still strong. Like, over the course of a campaign, averaging it out, I think she's incredible. But she's not S tier. She's one of the better investigators, but I wouldn't even say she's worth playing because the Greenman Medallion's going to ruin whatever campaign you put her in. Which is a sad note to end on, that ultimately I hate the Greenman Medallion so much I don't care how strong it makes you. And I think anyone who played alongside you, if you were playing in 2 players with another person as opposed to two-fisted like I was, would have an even more vehemently negative opinion of Greenman Medallion than I do. I actually posted a Reddit thread asking people how much experience they got from Greenman Medallion. My responses were exclusively people saying you must have done something wrong, and nobody talking about how much experience they got. Because the reality is, no one wants to play with this card. It's just not fun at all. No one knows how much experience it gets across different campaigns because they don't want to play Ginny Barnes, and they certainly don't want to play the Greenman Medallion version of her. And God, I don't blame them. The original Ginny Barnes has a pretty terrible stat line, and nothing to make up for it. Her unique signature assets and ability don't really change it. And the Greenman Medallion does. It gives you a very good reason to build Ginny Barnes. This deck is ridiculous. But you don't want to play the game the way that gets you here. You don't want to finish Curtain Call and just like hang out with the man in the pallid mask and be like, hey, how do you feel about the play? For like 5 turns. You just don't kill him because if you do, the theater's going to catch on fire. So you just hang out and do nothing and you wait and you kill the Royal Emissary over and over again until you're about to die to horror and then you leave. And that's not fun. It's tedious. It's not what you're supposed to be doing. It feels wrong and just awful across the board. I do think Ginny Barnes without the Greenman Medallion isn't terrible anymore. I used to think that she was like a middling to upper C tier character. But now, even without Greenman Medallion, I'd probably put her somewhere in B or low A. You don't need 84 experience to make this deck. There are a lot of things you can cut very easily. Despite being 84 experience, it's really easy to cut cards in this deck and get to a playable point. But the problem with that strategy and the other version of Ginny that doesn't have Greenman Medallion, the reason that strategy isn't nearly as good as Greenman Medallion, though, is because of how much longer it takes you to get fully online and to stop dealing with Ginny's terrible stat line. I bought Double Double and Black Fan for free in my first 2 scenarios. Well, for 1 experience, but that's basically the same thing. If I was playing the other Ginny, going into scenario 5, my deck would have looked like this Ginny's deck in scenario 3. And as I've said, endgame Ginny is broken. Even with a lot less experience, this endgame Ginny deck would still be broken. But you have to play the early game low experience Ginny a lot longer without Greenman Medallion, and it makes her much worse. To wrap up, the red clock is the only part of this deck unique to Ginny, and it's also the reason I'm able to spend 84 experience in the deck. If you cut that, and you just leave the big money shell that's there and give it to a different investigator, they'll probably do the same thing but better, and with a much stronger early game. Ginny's not bad, but her power curve is all over the place. She scales up harder than anyone else, but she starts almost as low as Skids. I'd think she was one of the most fascinating characters in the game if I didn't dislike Greenman Medallion so much, and I keep ranting about Greenman Medallion and losing track of where I am, so I'm going to end the video here. I've been rather incoherent. I hope this video is more than just me complaining about Greenman Medallion, but it certainly feels like that to me right now. If you want to see more Arkham Horror content, then subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.